devotion is actually a super fast shortcut. Now, this is interesting. Let me say something else. I know that there's this idea that these different paths exist: bhakti, jnana, yoga, and so on. These different paths exist for different dispositions. And it seems to make total sense, right? And this might be even true early on in the path. But as you proceed and as you keep developing, what you find is that all the paths become yours because you have a heart. So bhakti is important. You have an intellect. So jnana becomes important. You have a mind and a body. So all the yoga practices, the tantric practices, all these become important. So all these paths are everyone's way at some point when you reach a certain level. When it comes to devotion, though, it's a particularly fast shortcut. And actually, Patanjali talks about this. A verse in the first chapter, it's the 23rd verse, and he says, from special devotion to Ishvara, concentration becomes imminent. Now, what is concentration? To us, it sounds like a small thing. Oh, it means you can concentrate your mind. Big deal. Nothing special, right? That's what it sounds like. But actually, in the Yoga Sutras and in Vyasa's commentary, it's clear that concentration, which, by the way, is the subject of the entire first chapter, is super important. And as Vyasa says in his commentary on this verse, when concentration is gained, liberation is imminent. So it is actually a big thing. And the reason it's a big thing is, here, when you think about it, it's like normally people's minds are kind of blunt instruments. In fact, Jesus once said, it's in Matthew somewhere, you may look and look, but you don't see. You may listen, but you don't hear because your minds have become gross. That's the thing. If the mind is gross, then you only see the superficial level of reality. You can't perceive the fine levels of life, the truth of life. You miss it. So an ordinary person's mind, I was thinking you could say it's like a pickaxe. It's a very blunt instrument. With meditation, it starts to become sharper, like an axe, and then a sword, and a fine, sharp knife, and then one of those X-Acto knives, maybe. And then finally, like a surgical laser, intense power and super pinpoint accuracy and concentration. And you can experience that in your meditation. It's something to be experienced. Your mind becomes subtle like this. And when that happens, then, as I say, that the divinity that's inherent in everything starts to blossom. It starts to come forth. It ignites. And so it's when you achieve that concentration, it's a completely different quality of mind. It's a different quality of life. It's a quality of life that is ripe for enlightenment. As Vyasa says, then liberation becomes imminent. So it's crucial to have that concentration. And Vyasa says that this special devotion, and he calls it Ishvara Pranidhana, which also Patanjali talks about this in the Yoga Sutras. Because of that special devotion, Ishvara, or the personal God, favors the devotee with grace so that he attains concentration and liberation. And there's another verse that's interesting in chapter 3 when Patanjali is talking about samyama. And those of you who have taken the cities courses will find this interesting. So he talks about samyama, and he says samyama is to be applied to the stages of practice. Now, what does this mean? He's saying, do your samyama, and you'll gain proficiency at one stage, and then you'll gradually progress to the next stage, and to the next stage, and to the next stage. You can't jump over a stage, and ignore it. You'll need to progress in this natural, from one to the other. But Vyasa, in his commentary on that verse, says that there's one exception to this. If you've attained a higher stage by the grace of God through that Ishvara Pranidhana, then you don't need the lower stages because you already have proficiency in those as well by that grace. So again, and this is something also, and if you read like the Srimad Bhagavatam, I know there's a passage in there that says that yogis can strive for the cities and so on, but a bhakta, the cities lap at his heels like a dog, following him, something to that effect. So there's many different sources that are kind of, that converge on this same idea that bhakti is actually a great shortcut. Again, you might think that this is something that is kind of unattainable. And actually, early on, I had no interest in bhakti. In fact, I was mostly interested in yoga, the sort of subtler aspects of yoga, meditation, and so on. I trusted more in self-effort than devotion. And it seemed to be my path. Like I said, early on in your path, you're going to probably gravitate towards one method or another. But what I discovered was that eventually you may not know much about devotion. You may not care much about devotion, but it happens anyway. It's like you don't know, maybe a young child doesn't know anything about fire. And it doesn't matter that he doesn't know, that he doesn't understand. If he sticks his hand in the fire, it gets burnt. So like that, that's the nature of fire. That's the nature of these mantras, that they're permeated by the divine. And when you start to experience them at a subtle level, then that divinity just becomes manifest. And when the divinity becomes manifest, then devotion happens. And when devotion happens, that's when grace starts to flow. It's interesting, there's a lot of talk about in religions about good works. Well, the understanding in the Shastras of India is that through karma, the birth is determined, like the level of birth and your whole prarabdha, the karma that plays out in a given life is going to be determined by this, okay? But what brings God's grace is not karma as much as feeling, bhava. So feeling, devotion is what evokes God's grace. I realized that actually many people might not even like this message because, especially in the West, God has gotten kind of a bad rap, a bad name. Organized religions have been terrible PR for God, basically. Even to the point where you can't really say the word God in some contexts, in some, settings, right? Because you don't know what kind of reaction that's going to cause in the people listening. So I'm fully aware of this, fully aware that it might be a message people might not like. But at this point in the course, we have gone through so much knowledge, so many practices. What more do you want me to teach you? Well, I'm telling you, this is the shortcut that is going to bring everything that we've done so far to fruition. And so that you'll experience, and if you've taken the cities course, it will bring that to fruition. It'll be 100 times more powerful than what it is right now. When you gain that concentration through this Ishvara Pranidhana,